Welcome to the Project Management Prepcast, the key to PMP exam success. Here's your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner.
Hello and welcome to the Project Management Prepcast, where those who have passed the exam help those who are still studying by being interviewed. I am your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner. Today's episode, as you may have guessed, is an interview with another successful PMP exam taker. His name is William Rauch. He is a student of our PM Prepcast who recently passed his PMP exam and offered to talk about it here on the program. As you know, the rules of the PMP exam are such that we are not allowed to discuss specific questions from the exam, but we can discuss Bill's overall experience, general thoughts on the process, and his recommendations to you. Bill Rauch is a software developer and team leader. His experience includes management and development of client-server and web-based data-driven applications for government agencies such as the U.S. Department of Commerce, Transport, and NASA, as well as for private sector companies. His education includes a Master of Science in Information Systems Technology from the George Washington University and a Bachelor of Business Administration from James Madison University. In his spare time, as a hobby, he develops and provides support for the free, open-source time-tracking software called Timestamp, available at syntap.com. Hello, Bill, and welcome to the program.
Hello there, Cornelius. Great to be here.
Well, first of all, congratulations on passing your PMP exam.
Thank you. It's good to be on the other side of that thing.
So when exactly did you pass?
10:19 a.m., September 23rd. So just about 6 weeks ago.
Okay. 10:19 a.m. You know it that precisely?
Well, you said exactly. So, but
all right.
Yeah, I do remember when I signed out of the test. That was the exact time.
Okay. Why did you decide to take the PMP exam?
Well, a few coworkers had taken it, and in my company, having an advanced degree or a certification was kind of a goal they're doing this year. I already have a master's degree, and it actually included classes on project management and other things like organizational behavior. So I had some familiarity with project management practices and concepts. As time went on this year, as coworkers began studying for and passing the PMP exam, I looked to that to maybe be the next goal of my kind of education bug that sometimes hits. So I didn't take the exam because I was required to get the certification. It was more of an end game or a goalpost of learning about the project management body of knowledge. But it's funny, when I was asked that question in an exam prep boot camp with 12 people, I used a Dilbert cartoon reference.
Which one was that?
I said I wanted to earn the PMP so that as a guy with a development background, I can communicate better with pointy-haired bosses. But, no one in the room seemed to think that was very funny. I think a lot of them were probably pointy-haired bosses.
Might very well be. So if I understood you correctly, then that means that project management and the PMP is never really one of your life streams.
Well, hardly, but I'm glad I did it. Yeah, believe it or not, I guess there are people out there who are nutty enough to go through this whole process because they want to learn the materials and apply them to their real life work.
Yeah, that includes me, by the way. Well, now that you have your PMP, what do you expect that this certification will do for you?
That's kind of hard to say, and it really depends on, I think, my personal willingness to let go of the technical work on projects, on projects where I'm doing technical work and not kind of running them. I've worked on teams before where the project manager had some technical pieces of deliverables to work on, and in my experience, I think that's a mistake because what can end up happening is the project manager is then in a position of rating team members based on performance. And if for any reason the PM is late on his or her piece, it's easy to see how that would cause friction with the team.
Right.
The reason I bring that up is I like being in the technical weeds. And if I were to only do managing, I'm afraid I'd miss the technical fun and be tempted to assign myself work packages or worse, not give those responsible for the work enough room to breathe on their projects. And my team would hate me and we'd all go down together. Now, that said, as I get older and my technical skill set becomes, perhaps less competitive, then I'll certainly move on to the project management side more so and keep my interest going with open source tool development as a hobby or something like that.
Follow-up question to that. What I've often seen in companies when they have software development is that they have a full-time project manager, and then they also have a technical lead who is in charge of the team, the development team, who has some management skills, some project management skills, but also is down in the weeds, as you say. Do you see yourself more in that particular function then right now?
Quite possibly. If there is a happy medium or an in-between, that would probably be a better fit for me, as long as I wanted to stay technical in the project. There may be projects where I look at the goals of the project and say to myself, man, my heart's not really, into making this thing happen from a technical perspective, but I'd like to run it and make sure it does happen, if you get my meaning. And in those cases, sure, then being the project manager would fit perfectly.
Mm-hmm. Oftentimes, people say that having the PMP in today's marketplace is almost a must for a project manager. You mentioned that many of your colleagues were taking the PMP exam. Is that because they are full-time project managers and they feel that they need it, or how do you see this from your angle?
Well, from my angle, the people taking it were doing this as more because they had to as part of this corporate goal that I referred to before. But having gone through this material and gone through the exam, I guess from a developer perspective, I'd be happier working with a person with a PMP than someone without, at least from an introductory or some kind of screening standpoint. I don't think one necessarily needs to be a PMP to be a good project manager. And personally, I've always considered advanced degrees coupled with a history of success to be more meaningful than certifications. And in the past, I thought that because I go back to what happened to all the Novell certified people that had to have it 10, 20 years ago or in the 90s. The technologies and the market preferences changed, and they had to go all get new certifications. But I think the PMP is more broad and won't have that problem. From a team or a project leader perspective, when the job markets get bad, it's certainly good to make yourself more marketable. And in my experience, some hiring managers, some may not care about certifications at all and question their worth, while other companies may make it a requirement. And from my perspective, unlike other technical certifications that someone with no real work experience can achieve, the PMP exam application process requires that one document education and experience.
Yes.
So it kind of has a built-in mechanism to tell the marketplace that this person can not only pass a test, but has experience managing projects and probably has a few lessons learned in their head too.
Yeah, and I think that's really the bigger factor in the application itself, that you can show, hey, I have experience in the field of project management. The educational part, I believe, is more in there to ensure that we all speak the same language from a theoretical point of view as well. So let's see. You passed your exam at 10:19. When, what day and what time then did you first decide that you wanted to become a PMP?
That one's a little more fuzzy. It kind of happened in phases. Mm-hmm. In early summer, I purchased the PMBOK guide and started reading it to familiarize myself with the content, because that was my first goal, just to kind of see what the PMBOK was all about. And at that point, I hadn't decided for sure if I would actually go through and take the exam. Mm-hmm. I just kind of wanted to educate myself. But it didn't take long to decide that this was something I believed I could do in taking the exam. And why not use the exam as a goalpost and have something nice to show for it?
So let's see, midsummer to so about 3 to 4 months in total?
It was roughly a 4-month process.
Yeah.
It didn't really kick into gear until my company decided to pay for a boot camp for some employees to attend in the August timeframe. So I jumped on the bandwagon and firmly decided at that point that I'd eventually find myself in an exam chair. In my case, that was my final nudge to go ahead and schedule the exam and decide for sure that I was going to take it. in my mind, if my company had money invested in my training, then I needed to repay them with at least an attempt at taking the exam. So I decided yes on the boot camp and yes on the exam.
Okay. Let's go to the exam in just a minute, but let's wind back here because you said you read the PMBOK guide out of your own volition. How did that go for you, reading the PMBOK guide dry?
Well, it did not start well. In fact, I didn't finish it, and I guess we can talk about that later. But reading the PMBOK guide, from start to finish, I had a problem really absorbing everything past the first 100 or 150 pages, past the introductory stuff.
Okay, so let's move on to your boot camp. Was it beneficial for you?
I think it was. The instructor took us through samples of network diagrams. We drilled forward and backward paths, float, critical path identification exercises. In addition to that, we received a test prep book that was interesting. For starters, it was a little easier to read than the PMBOK guide.
What a surprise.
Yeah, what a surprise. And it grouped and presented all the processes in order of process group. In other words, in this boot camp, we did all the initiating processes, then all the planning processes, and so forth. And it gave a different perspective than going through them all by knowledge area. And I think I better understood the flows of outputs from one process to the inputs of others. And the relationships were a little more formed in my head, which came in handy for the exam.
How long did the boot camp take?
It was 5 days.
5 days. And did many of your colleagues take the exam right after the boot camp?
The instructor recommended that you wait no more than 3 or 4 weeks after the boot camp to take the exam. From a time frame perspective, we were about a month or two past when the flood of people who wanted to take the PMP exam for version 3 were through the system and they were flushed out. So there was a little bit more time and ease of scheduling available for the version 4 exam. There were some, we ended the boot camp on Friday. 2 of the people took it the following Monday, and both passed. Others were a little bit later. I believe I was 3 weeks after the exam, and a couple more have taken it, and there are still more that have not yet taken it.
What was the book that you received during the boot camp?
The study guide was published by Element K Courseware.
Never heard of them. Element K Courseware. And what's the book title? Okay.
I don't have it on me. It was probably a project management preparation or something like that.
Oh, so was that the material that they just had for that particular bootcamp? Or is this an officially published book that, you could go to Amazon and buy it from there?
I don't believe it's available on Amazon.
Okay.
Yeah, they had it with the course. I did eventually find it, and it is published by the Element K people.
Right. Did you purchase any other types of study guides, like, the Rita Mulcahy book or the Cybex book or any other PMP exam preparation workbook?
Workbooks, no.
No. All right. And did you go back to the PMBOK guide?
Occasionally.
Occasionally. So you never actually read the PMBOK guide all the way through then?
No, not from cover to cover.
Okay.
What ended up happening, I kind of fell into a personal strategy with this. Before I'd read the first 100 pages or so of the PMBOK guide, and I felt like I was not absorbing or internalizing things enough, and I was worried that stuff would fall out of my head too easily. And knowing the amount of stuff you have to know for the exam, I knew that for me, that reading the PMBOK guide alone would not be enough. And that's when, kind of at that point, I was kind of trying to figure out what to do, and here's your plug. A coworker showed me the PM Prepcast. And having listened to a few episodes, which were version 3 episodes, I thought I'd buy it and go through it using the new version 4 episodes.
Yes.
During my commutes to and from work. And that's an hour each way. And I found that was a great way to take advantage of the quiet time that I otherwise had. So after going through the Prepcast once and the boot camp and beginning to answer sample questions, I read the PMBOK guide for the areas I needed the most help on based on my sample question results, particularly in the quality management and risk management chapters, while going through the Prepcast a second time, heading into the final copy or into the final couple of weeks before the exam. But did I ever read it cover to cover? No. I read the Code of Ethics and Social Responsibility cover to cover, but not the full PMBOK guide.
Code of Ethics, cover to cover, that's about like 6 pages. That's easy. That's easy. A couple of follow-up questions here in regards to the Prepcast and also the questions that you mentioned. Let's begin with the Prepcast here. You said you listened to it in your car. Now, the Prepcast is video, so you obviously didn't watch the videos as you were driving. At least I hope not.
No, that would have been bad.
Yes. How effective was it for you to to listen to the video presentations while driving without being able to refer to the actual slides?
It was very effective, and I kind of worried about that at first because from what I heard of the version 3 of the Prepcast, of course there was no video.
Yes.
So then when I thought, I'll get version 4 and listen to it in the car, now there's video. What do I do? I found that it was very effective to listen to it and not watch the slides. For me and my learning style, kind of driving and listening, I was absorbing a lot more. Now, there were some times where I would, pick it up and look at it if there was a chart I really needed to see.
Yes.
If it was an earned value formula or you mentioned a picture or a graph or something in there, then I would take the time to give that a look.
Yeah, that was when we started creating the Prepcast. That was one of the goals that we had. Even though it's now video-based, voice-over PowerPoint, the idea was still you have to be able to just listen to it without 100% needing to watch it, just because I know we have people like yourself who are commuting and you want to, just put down your iPod and drive, and you don't have the opportunity to look at the videos. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. And how does it compare, the Prepcast, to your boot camp?
Well, the good news is I'd been through a number of the Prepcast episodes before the boot camp.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time I got to the boot camp, I felt like a lot of what they were going through the boot camp was review. And I felt like I was a little bit more ahead of others in the class in that respect.
Excellent. Let's come back to the sample questions that you mentioned. From my point of view, it's one of the most important things that you need to do as you are preparing for the PMP exam, because when you're taking a driving test, you drive and you drive and you drive and you make sure you know how you drive. And because the PMP exam means answering questions, answering these sample questions is extremely important. So how many questions would you say in total did you answer before you took the exam?
Hundreds. I mean,
hundreds. Good.
That's all I can say. I mean, in the last few weeks before the exam, I started by answering at least 20 a day, and then I ramped up to 50, and then occasionally would do a 100 question or 200 question run.
Mm-hmm.
Now there are days here and there, usually a day after I did a 200 run, that I didn't do any, but I worked on sample questions a lot.
And did you just use free questions that you found on the web, or did you subscribe to an online exam simulator?
I don't recall using any free ones. I had access to some commercially available sample test questions as part of the boot camp package.
Oh, excellent.
I'd use those.
Yes, I always recommend to people, the free questions on the internet, they're good, but they're, you get what you pay for. They're free.
Exactly.
Right. So if you really want good quality questions that somebody put actual thought into and made sure that they are compatible with the new PMBOK guide and the new exam specifications for the latest PMP exam, then you have to go out there and you have to get yourself access to an exam simulator, or just buy a CD or something along those lines.
I agree.
In the end, was there a particular area of the study materials that was more or less difficult for you?
Well, in the past couple of years, I've been involved in CMMI as both an appraisal team member and as a member of an appraised project. So the idea of standardized processes and best practices was already very familiar to me. I remembered liking quality control processes and tools from classes in college, so I didn't have any problems there. I found earned value to be difficult in the very beginning only because so many people go through the material say it's hard to understand, and it seemed like something I should be afraid of or something. But once I started going through it with the Prepcast, I very quickly saw that the concepts were not hard to understand at all. That said, I didn't memorize all the earned value formulas. The ones I didn't really absorb, I just chalked off to my personal exam, kind of risk contingency reserve.
Yes.
So the difficulty was more in getting through the volume of the material and getting used to the tricky nature of test questions, and not so much having trouble understanding the material itself.
Right. Well, then let me ask you a follow-up questions in regard to these earned value formulas that you didn't know. After the exam, would you have liked to have known them?
Well, I passed.
Okay.
So the answer to that is no. I didn't have any regrets about the level of my memorization of the earned value formulas.
All right. Good. That's about as much hint we can give here without getting into any ethics about giving away questions on the exam, right?
Sure.
So how much did you study in total?
I hear people give an estimate of the hours spent in listening to the Prepcast. I think other interviewees had said 90 or 100 hours, and all that seemed pretty daunting when I heard that. Mm-hmm. If I look back and counted up all the hours I spent on reading and the Prepcast and running sample questions, I'm sure it was more than that. Probably not even including the boot camp week.
Yeah, that's probably alone 40 hours right there, right?
Sure. To me, you could be ready in 40 hours if you had a learning style where you could read the PMBOK guide and absorb it very well, or maybe even not ready after 90 hours if you've overstudied in areas or ways that didn't help much. Personally, I didn't give any thought to how many hours I was putting in or some benchmark of how many I had to complete before I thought I was ready. I was more using percentage of test questions correct as a benchmark.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what percentage did you select?
At the beginning of the week, I was getting low 70s. But by the beginning of the week, I'm talking about the weeks between the boot camp and actually taking the exam.
Yes.
I was getting low 70 percentage, and by the time I got through doing all those sample questions over and over again, and many, many different ones, I was in the low 80s. And at that point, I felt I was ready to take the exam.
Yes, that's also what I tell people. If you can take a new PMP sample exam test, sort of 200 questions, and you've never seen those questions before, and you get around 80, above 80, you're good to go. You have to be able to do it 2 or 3 times, obviously. You can't just, take them once and go, oh, well, I've been able to get 81%. I'm ready to go. Well, that's just, statistically not very good to just do it once. But yeah, if you're regularly above 80, you're good to go.
Agreed.
Yeah. Here's another question that many students ask. Do I have to know the inputs, tools, techniques, and outputs by heart? Do I have to memorize them?
Well, a coworker who took the exam a year before I did said definitely. You're not going to pass without doing that.
Right.
But as I went through the Prepcast and took sample questions, I learned that I didn't feel I really had to, because as you suggest in the Prepcast, if you know what's happening in the processes, you should be able to kind of derive the correct ITTOs when asked a multiple choice question, or at least I could. So if someone asked me to write down the ITTOs for a particular process, I would probably think about what's happening in the process and write down Bill's version of the ITTOs based on my understanding. But I did not attempt to memorize all the ITTOs for all the processes. If your brain is wired to be able to do that, and that's great, and I'm sure you'll answer some exam questions correctly that I might have gotten wrong. But I took it to heart that understanding the processes was more important than memorizing them. Plus, I was doing this mostly for my own educational benefit, and to me, memorizing a bunch of lists wasn't something I thought would really help me in real life. So I didn't go that route. So do you have to know all the ITTOs by heart? If your personal learning style says you should memorize them, then by all means do it. But I didn't memorize them, and I passed the exam.
Okay. Along a similar line here, you mentioned that you read the Code of Ethics cover to cover. Easy thing to do, like I said. After the exam, would it have been helpful for you if you had known which of the standards are mandatory standards and which are aspirational standards?
I don't recall that particular division of standards being something that, leaving the exam, I felt that I should have studied more. The social and ethical standards kind of come into play in situational questions, judging what might be the correct thing or the best thing to do in certain situations. So if you absorb the standards and are able to apply them to situational questions, I think that's probably as far as you need to go.
All right. take me through your exam experience here. Let's begin maybe a week before you took your actual exam. What did you do the last week before your exam?
Well, at that point, I was already in to my 50 or 100 or 200 question per day mode. So I continued that. I went on a family reunion trip the weekend before the exam, so my family got to hear Cornelius for a couple of hours. But I focused most on areas I was showing weakness in with my practice questions and didn't spend a whole lot of time on the rest. As I was keeping that material fresh in my head, just by taking sample questions, I didn't feel I needed to revisit a whole lot of that. And also, as you suggested, I took some time and scoped out the test center, and I was really, really glad that I did that because something unusual happened. A week before the exam, I thought I'd click around on Prometric's website, the test center company's website, to see if I could find a printable receipt of some kind for my exam fees. I didn't have any luck doing that, so for kicks, I pulled up my exam date confirmation and found that the address listed for my exam was different from what was listed on my confirmation when I originally signed up for my test date. Now, at that time, I didn't know if the website had an old address or if my test center had moved. And further complicating things, a coworker had taken the exam at this very test center just 10 days prior to that. So I knew something wasn't right. So I called the test center, and the voicemail gave me the original location. I said, well, okay. I drove by the original address and found it was locked up, and there was nothing in the facility. So I called
Fascinating.
I called the Prometric's main customer service line, and they verified me for me to include a new confirmation email that the test center had indeed moved that very week. So I drove to the new test center and eyeballed it just to make sure I knew where to go on exam day. Now, if I had just kept a printout of the original exam confirmation and hopped in the car the morning of my test, I would have had no idea why everything was locked up or where to go, and that would not have been a good mix with the normal exam day jitters. I did receive a 48-hour reminder via email prior to the test date, and the new address was on that one. But if I just said, oh, yeah, I know I need to take the exam this week, it's kind of on my mind, and deleted that email or ignored it, I wouldn't have known.
I mean, you don't open up that email expecting that the address is suddenly different.
Exactly.
Yeah. So let's fast forward to the moment when you parked your car outside, you got out of the car, and you walk into the test center. Tell us what happened from here on forward.
Well, I walked into a lobby that was kind of similar to a doctor's office. There was a reception desk and some chairs in there, as well as a set of locker cabinets. The staff was delightful and professional. They had me sign a document saying I agreed to the rules of the test center, and they had me put all the contents of my pockets into a locker, and I kept the key to that locker with me.
Did you have to take your watch off as well?
Fortunately for me, I don't wear a watch.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And you also had to show them your ID, I suppose?
I had to show them ID. That's correct.
Okay, so everything is in a locker. What now?
Then they walked me back into another area where the test proctors do their video monitoring jobs and sign people in and out of the test area. Mm-hmm. So I signed in, and they led me to a larger room with a bunch of cubicles. They showed me to my terminal, and I got started.
Okay. Did they start everything for you, or did you sit down and you had to click? How did that work?
When I got to the terminal, it was just a button to kind of begin the tutorial. I didn't have to boot up the computer or do anything like that. It's like once I sat down, I could then get into it.
Right, and you clicked the start tutorial. It wasn't the person who led you into the room who said, I'm now going to start it for you.
That's correct.
Okay. So you did the tutorial, obviously?
Yeah, I quickly went through the tutorial. I used some of that time on my brain dump sheet, as some recommend. Actually, before I had considered going into the test without a dump sheet. I wasn't using one on my sample tests, and I was still scoring okay. But in the end, I decided to make one with various formulas just so I wouldn't second-guess myself during the exam if I got nervous or for whatever reason.
Yeah, it's really just more of it's a safety blanket, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
You have it there, and you can look at it, and you can reference it. Yeah.
I wrote down formulas. I wrote down names of theorists that were coming up in sample questions, like Deming and Crosby, McGregor, and those guys. I I wrote down the process groups and the knowledge areas in kind of a grid formation, kind of as it is in the PMBOK guide, but I did not write out all the processes except for the quality ones so I could keep them straight. And I kind of left that template on my dump sheet later in case I needed to jog my memory on something during the exam.
Mm-hmm. Did you take any breaks during the exam?
I took a bathroom break after about 125 questions.
Okay.
At that point, I felt myself getting tired, and after I was done with that, took that little break, I sat back down and finished the exam.
Mm-hmm. And when you left the room, did you have to sign out and sign back in? And did you have to show ID, or how does that work?
I did not have to show ID, but I did have to sign out, and then sign back in when I came back in.
Okay. Then you finished the exam and you push the button that you're done. What happens after you push the button and you say, I'm finished?
Well, there's a pause. And
very long pause, I suppose.
Very
or
long
at least
pause.
It feels like it.
It was a very long pause, and there was no immediate payback because I didn't get the result right away. I got a 5-question survey on my exam experience.
Yes, and they force you to do that survey now, right? There's no way to get around it.
Well,
I believe.
I didn't want to mess around with the computer and screw up my test results. So
okay.
I gave them my feedback, and after that, I got my test result with the pass.
Okay. If you had to give other students out there any study recommendations, what area of the materials would you say that they need to focus on?
They need to focus on whatever they are weakest on after having gone through many, many test questions, sample test questions. Some things that others had told me to focus on after the exam were areas I didn't really feel I had a problem with. A common one was, I wish I had studied all the quality tools better. I went back and I made sure I knew them, but I kind of already did. So I did have things I had to get straight, such as the differences between quality planning, assurance, and control, as well as some of the risk processes. But in my mind, the key is to do as many sample questions as possible and definitely do a true exam simulation, because I had a coworker who took and passed the exam, and the word he used was brutal. He said he found it brutal. But after speaking with him, I know that he never did a full exam simulation. And I'm not talking about going through 200 questions one at a time and seeing if you got the answer right. I'm talking about going through 200 and then going back through once you have the results so you can research why you got answers wrong. If you try to emulate as much as possible the exam experience, you're going to be able to recognize when you're getting tired and need a break. And you'll know how much break time is going to be okay. During my practices, I was getting through 200 sample questions with a bathroom break in about 2.5 hours. So I knew I had plenty of slack time built in there. But someone who had not gone through 200 questions wouldn't know if they're on a pace that's normal for them. And because, as you know, some people need the entire 4 hours and some people only need 2. But it's and I recommend to my coworkers, it's very helpful to know where you fit into that range before you take the real thing.
Is there anything that you would do differently if you had to do this again?
Well, I passed.
Once again, the approach worked, yes?
Yeah, so of course in my mind, my approach was absolutely perfect.
Yes.
But no, for me, I felt that when I sat down for the exam, I was personally very prepared and I was confident to take it.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything that you wouldn't study at all?
In terms of earned value, I focused on understanding and memorizing the formulas for schedule and cost variance, but not the schedule and as well as the schedule and cost performance indexes. For some reason, like I mentioned before, like the forecasting ones just kept falling out of my head. And as I said earlier, there were some things I just simply followed under risk acceptance and decided to count those questions against my risk reserve of questions that I can get wrong. But I still read and studied those concepts. And as an example, in the prepcast, I don't recall anything in the prepcast I would term unnecessary or useless for purposes of studying for the exam.
After the exam, you got up, you walked out of the room, and I believe the proctors then hand you a printout of your results, right?
They do.
Yeah. Do you mind sharing what you got?
Oh, sure. I wish they would give you a percentage of how you did, because after having gone through so many sample test questions, it would have been neat to kind of been able to compare how I did in the sample test questions versus the real thing. But they don't give you that. They give you 3 possible ranks of not proficient, moderately proficient, or proficient in the 5 process groups and the ethics and social responsibility section.
Yes.
So I got proficient in closing and in ethics, and moderately proficient in all the rest.
Okay, that's very nice. That's very nice. Yeah, the PMI stopped talking about the passing score as a percentage. In fact, they ask everyone not to talk about a percentage anymore. And there is a number that's floating out there. It's 61%. However, whether that number is still correct or not, that is up to debate. The last time that number was correct was in 2005. That was the last time when PMI officially released a percentage for the passing score of the PMP exam. So they're probably tweaking it, constantly going up and going down in this particular percentage. And with this, in this way, they can adjust the passing score based on the actual difficulty of the questions that they are adding, because it's constantly they add new questions and take old ones out.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I've known people to get not proficient in 1 and even 2 of those areas and still pass the exam.
Yes. Because overall, it's still, that is at least my understanding. I could be wrong here. It's overall still a percentage of the question that you have correctly answered that is needed for you to pass, right? But again, there is no guarantee that it truly is that way, because PMI does not communicate the exact manner of how they calculate the passing scores anymore to us. That's unfortunate, because frankly, I would much rather have a percentage so that everyone knows, you've got to get 62.85% right in order to pass.
Yeah, and during the boot camp, they did use that percentage as in a way that you would formulate your own personal benchmark, and they say, well, you need to have, get through this many questions correct, and make up for the sample or the fake questions that they put in there for their own exam purposes.
All right, so you're now a PMP. Let's take a look into your future. I mean, this was not your live stream to become a PMP. Now you've got it. So what's next in your career? Do you plan on taking any other certifications?
I think I'll continue what I'm doing until circumstances have me looking for a different job or different work. And then based on job market and current usefulness of my technical skills, I'll decide then whether to stay in software development, or if it's time to use my experience in development, project management, as well as the PMP certification and its materials to move into more of a leadership role, or perhaps into education. My hope is with a portfolio of successful projects, a Master of Science, and the PMP, someone will still want me later. But I tell you, after having gone through the process of self-education with the PrepCast, I would, whatever certification I may follow in the future, I'm not saying you have to make it, Cornelius, but I would, not that I wouldn't enjoy that thoroughly, but I would. I've learned a little bit about my personal learning style, and I would definitely want to go through something like that for future certifications.
Good. Well, let me know what certification you're taking, and I'll consider doing some kind of a training course, especially for you. Bill.
Fair enough. Great.
All right. Thank you very much for having been on the program today. It's been a pleasure, and once again, congratulations on passing your PMP exam.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity to pass on my experience, and I hope others will find it useful.
Superb. Thank you so much. This has been great. Appreciate it.